Hello, this is the first video for CS141, even though it says L2. We've been talking about algorithms, and now I wanted to start talking about how you would actually implement an algorithm and introduce a very, very simple programming language that we can work on called Scratch. So, how do we write an algorithm, actually? Because we've talked about it. But you go through algorithms and you use algorithms every day, and so I wanted to give you a simple example of something that you do every day in the form of an algorithm. So here's our algorithm. Putting on your socks in the morning. And you get up when you get out of bed, most of you won't have any socks on. So we start out with the number of socks on your feet is equal to 0. And then as long as you don't have both socks on, we're going to keep trying to find socks for you to put on here. That's what line 2 says. So line 3 then says, open your sock drawer, look for a sock. If you find a sock, then you put it on. Now you have one sock on your feet, so you can increment the counter and by 1. That's what the plus plus does on line 7. And now you have one sock on. And so the next thing you do is look for a matching sock. If you find one, put the matching sock on, increment the number of socks you have on your feet, and close the sock drawer. You now have 2 socks on. And so that way you can skip the else, you can skip the other else, and you have 2 socks on, so you're done. But what happens if you don't? So if we go and look at line 13, we get to line 13, if we don't find a matching sock. If you don't find a matching sock, you don't want to wear an odd pair, so you remove the first sock from your foot, and then you decrement the number of socks on your feet, so you now have back to 0. And then you'd go back up and open the sock drawer and do it again. And so that works fine. Now we can go back and look at line 5. Line 5 is if you find a sock, well then we went into the red area there. But what if we didn't find a sock? If we didn't find a sock, then we go all the way down to line 16, which is the else clause, which is if you didn't find a sock, what else would you do? And then line 17 says you go do your laundry and replenish the sock drawer, which will take you back up to line 2. You don't have any socks on, so you go back and try again. So that's a simple way to look at an algorithm, and it uses a lot of the things that we will need to know, including variables, the number of socks on your feet, doing something over and over again, which is called a loop, and then making decisions about things. Those are the 3 fundamental things that we'll have to learn to do as we move along. All right, well, so then moving along, let's start talking about Scratch. So Scratch is a programming language, an entire system, actually, that was developed at MIT. And it's a graphical programming language. You drag and drop things in. You create these little guys called sprites, and you drag and drop programming elements in to create scripts to get the sprites to do something for you. So first things first, please go to the URL at the on the screen and create a Scratch account from yourself. This will be important for you to be able to create your own programs, but then also once you get a Scratch account, you'll be able to look at my programs, which we're going to go through in the next video. While you're there creating your account, go to this URL and look at the videos. There's a great getting started video, and then there's several other videos that you can look at. Each one of them is only 5 or 10 minutes long, and they're very good introduction to Scratch. Okay, Scratch. When you first try to create a project in Scratch, this is what you should see. This area has 4 different sections. This is the main stage where the stuff that you're going to create will show up. This area down here is where your sprites will live, so every time you create a sprite, you'll see these little icons down here. this area in the middle is where all of the commands for the Scratch language live. And the way you create a script for a sprite is you take one of these commands and you drag it over to here. And this is the editing and program area. And you notice that these all of these little symbols here have little knobs and holes in them, and that's how you connect them together. We'll get into that when we see the examples. So Scratch itself has a number of different pieces to it. It has things called statements. So for example, one statement is, this is how you start your programs typically. You click on the green flag, and when the green flag gets clicked, stuff gets done. Like getting one of the sprites to say something, and that creates a little bubble and the sprite says something. You can also get the sprite to play a sound. Notice the different colors, the different kinds of things that you can do are color-coded. They're also coded by shape, which we'll get to in a minute. So you can play sounds. Sounds are either built in, because there's a library of available sounds. You can also upload sounds, or you can record sounds. You can also move, so you can have the sprites move around on the screen and do things. And you can also have them, so say you want them to stop and wait for something else to happen, you can do that kind of thing as well. Boolean expressions. Boolean expressions always result in an answer of true or false. So, for example, did you find a sock in the sock drawer? Yes, no. If you did, then you do something. If you didn't, we do something else. That's what Boolean expressions are. And you can say yes is true and false is no. And the Boolean expressions come from this guy named George Boole, who was a 19th century British mathematician. Here's an example of a simple Boolean operator in Scratch that says, is this value less than that value? It asks that musical question. And the answer, of course, will be either yes or no. And so you can drop it in. You can also ask questions like, is the mouse button down? Did I just press the space key? Is this sprite touching some other sprite, or is it touching the edge of the board or not? And then you can also combine expressions. Is the mouse down, and am I touching something? Oops, okay, accidentally went forward. Okay, so the next thing is, how do you make decisions? And you make decisions by using these conditions for Boolean expressions, and you have selection statements. And you notice that all the Boolean expressions are hexagonal, and so they will drop into here, and this is the condition of the if statement. So we could have a statement like, if you have one sock on, then we'll do something else. Or you can say, if you have one sock on, do something else, otherwise do something different. And we can also nest them. So if I have one sock on, or if I don't have a sock on and it's blue or it's not blue, do something else. I'm just making these up as I go along. Loops. Sometimes you want to do things over and over again. There's two ways to do loops in Scratch. One, you can loop forever. This is usually a bad idea, but you can occasionally make it work. Or you can do something some finite number of times, so you can repeat something 10 times. And here you can put in as many of those little blocks as you want to. So variables is the next thing. You get to name the variables, and you get to use them. So for example, for us, we could create a variable called number of socks, and we could set its initial value to 0, and that would be a little block that we would put in one of our scripts. Then, if we found a sock, we could change the value of that variable by 1, so that would increment it. You can also change it by -1 to decrement it. Okay. That's actually most of what we're going to need in terms of syntax for Scratch. And so the next video will be a little bit longer, and there'll be a set of examples that I'll run through in Scratch. So stay tuned for all of that, and thanks for listening.